I mean, and could I just understand, because it seems like an extremely expansive argument, I must say, encouraging people basically to suppress their own speech. So, like Justice Kavanaugh, I've had some experience encouraging press to suppress their own speech. You just wrote a bad editorial. Here are the 5 reasons you shouldn't write another one. You just wrote a story that's filled with factual errors. Here are the 10 reasons why you shouldn't do that again. I mean, this happens literally thousands of times a day in the federal government.
Yeah, and I would say in the Minoran case that you're describing to me, it's the government going after the speaker itself and trying to get them to change their speech. What's so pernicious here is that you don't see any of these facts in this record unless we get discovery, which is when Rob Flaherty, who's Deputy Assistant to the President, sends an email to Facebook or to Twitter and complains that they're not doing enough to censor what they view as vaccine hesitancy speech. America never sees that, and the third party, people like Jill Hines and Jim Hoft, whose speech wishes to express the kinds of viewpoints that the White House is targeting, they never know that that's happening behind the scenes. And I think it makes a difference, Justice Kagan, that you have an intermediary here who really has no incentive to itself defend Jim Hoft's speech or to defend Jill Hines' speech. In the New York Times hypothetical, you have a storied publication that itself is familiar with those kinds of
op-eds? What about op-eds?
Your Honor, and with op-eds, you know, if it's a third-party speech that
that happens too, right?
And I guess there are a number of ways I would think about that, Your Honor. One is if the newspaper declines to run an op-ed because the government asked, that op-ed author can go to any number of other publications and it has an outlet. It's not the same here, because if I'm on Twitter and I wish to express a viewpoint that the government wishes to censor and Twitter bows to that pressure, then I lose my account.
I was just going to say, first, I have no experience coercing anybody. But second, I mean, the government is not monolithic either. I suspect when there's pressure put on one of the platforms or certainly one of the other media outlets, they have people they go to, probably in the government, to say, hey, they're trying to get me to do this, and that person may disagree with what the government's trying to do this. It's not monolithic, and that has to dilute the concept of coercion significantly, doesn't it?
Your Honor, I'm not sure I agree with that, and I guess I'd get back to one of the earlier points I made, which is, you know, whether you call this coercion, if that's the label you attach, you call it encouragement, you call it promotion, you call it inducement. Whatever it is, if the government is attempting to abridge the speech rights of a third party, that has to be unconstitutional because that falls within the plain text of the First Amendment. And so, you know, this is Bantam Books of the 21st century. You haven't had a case with social media platforms like this where third-party speech is so at risk of being censored.
Well, but how do you analyze a situation where, you know, maybe EPA is trying to coerce the platform about something and the Army Corps of Engineers is trying to coerce them the other way? I mean, you can't just sort of pick and choose which part of the government you're concerned about.
Your Honor,
and obviously it's a different when you're talking about what the president is saying in particular, but other than that, I think it's a very more fluid situation than anything else.
It is fluid, Your Honor, but I would say that when you have, as we have plaintiffs in this case who wish to express certain viewpoints that have been specifically targeted by the government, you know, it's not at least fluid in these facts. And this is not a case just about COVID. It's a case about election integrity. It's a case the district court has a finding about how the government.
So, I mean, what about that? I mean, you know, take an example where, I mean, these platforms, they're compilers of speech, and some part of the government, let's call it part of the law enforcement arm of the government, says you might not realize it, but you are hosting a lot of terrorist speech, which is going to increase the chances that there's going to be some terrible harm that's going to take place. And we want to give you this information. We want to try to persuade you to take it down. The government can't do that?
The government can absolutely do that, Justice Kagan.
They're asking them to take down the speech.
Terrorist activity, criminal activity that is not protected speech. Absolutely, the government can inform
much it might be protected speech. I mean, terrorists engage in, you know, things that come under the First Amendment. I mean, let's say they're just recruiting people for their organizations.
Your Honor, if it's First Amendment speech, protected speech down, I think we're in an entirely different world. I mean, that's a case where, and this comes up in the FBI findings that the district court made, because what was happening is the FBI was sending teleporter encrypted messages to the platforms identifying what the government represents was foreign actors. The district court found the government was not distinguishing between whether it was domestic or foreign conduct. And the way this issue arises is when maybe you have a foreign actor who tweets, I love Biden, and there are 20 million people who wish to retweet that, repost that with their own comments saying, heck yeah, I love Biden too. When an American does that, that's First Amendment protected speech, Your Honor. And so when the government comes in and tries to take down every single post that contains the core that they say was foreign speech, but they're also taking down the added speech by Americans, that's a square First Amendment issue, Your Honor.
So back in this still happens now. Decades ago, it happened all the time, which is somebody from the White House got in touch with somebody from the Washington Post and said this will just harm national security, and the Washington Post said, okay, whatever you say. I mean, that was all. That we didn't know enough, but that was coercion.
Your Honor, I thought I understood the government this morning to say that might be a First Amendment issue. And I think what I would say is if there's a national security interest, maybe the government can satisfy strict scrutiny in that circumstance. What I would also say is we probably wouldn't have a lawsuit based on that, because I don't know how that we would get prospective injunctive relief based on a fleeting, offhand, reach out from the White House.
I guess what I'm just trying to suggest is that there's all kinds of things that can appear on these platforms that do all kinds of different harms, and the inability of government that you're suggesting to reach out to these platforms and say, we want to give you information that you might not know about on this, and we want to give you our perspective on what harms that this is doing. And we want to be able to answer questions that you have, because we really do think that it would be a good thing if you, on your own, chose to take this speech down.